Hello, class. Today we are discussing unit part two of World War II, our unit on literature uh, from and about World War II and the Holocaust. The author we're looking at today, and I'll share a whiteboard, is Zofia Nałkowska. Um, Zofia Nałkowska. Who remains a very important figure in Polish literature even today. She's still widely read in Polish, uh, in, in, in Polish schools and whatnot, and she's becoming much more well known around the world. It's taken a while, but that's how American American high schools are concerned with American literature. So you're not going to find a lot of Polish literary figures in it. She lived 1884 to 1954, so she was born well before Poland was independent again. Um, and then she witnessed independence and lived quite a while afterwards. So she was able to, she had a really wide range of the Polish, experience of independence, of non-independence, independence, non-independence, independence, right, after World War II. So she's still very well loved in Poland. She was a fiction writer. Her novels are still read quite widely. She often discussed in her work very socially difficult themes. She wrote in 1932. She wrote an essay that was published called "The Structure of Eroticism." It defended the discussion of sex and the erotic in literature. And this was kind of scandalous at the time, but she didn't apologize for it. She stood by what she had to say in the essay. Um, and a lot of it is, these days it would probably not raise as many eyebrows as it did at the time. But it was an important work in the history of Polish literature, Polish literary study. Medallions, then, the work we're reading today, is the result of interviews she conducted with victims and perpetrators of the Holocaust. She was appointed president of the Commission for the in, Investigation of War Crimes in Auschwitz. So she was appointed this position, and through her interviews, that's where we get this book, this slim little volume that is just packed with tragedy and terror, but told in a really elegant, straightforward manner. The bulk of what I want to do right now, this is going to be a very short video. We've already talked about World War II and the Holocaust. So I'm going to just point to a couple, well, actually, let's do this first. Themes to keep in mind as you read and discuss this. So a few of these you'll remember from past lectures. The industrialization of murder and the economy of death that the Nazis employed. Um, the industrialization that they perfected in killing people, and then the economy that they built around that death. So keep that in mind. Bearing witness as a resistant, how about this, as an act of resistance. So this is a common theme in a lot of Holocaust literature. What resistance can you offer when you've been stripped of your will, stripped of your individuality, stripped of your humanity, when there's very little you can do, you know, in the situation a lot of the victims find themselves, there's little that they can do. There's little resistance they can offer up, in the way of struggling, their struggle against the oppressive forces that they find themselves at odds with. Um, and so the last resistant act that you can do is just to bear witness, to live, right? Living itself becomes an act of resistance at one point, and surviving the, surviving the terror of this moment um, allows one who is who is survived, allows the victim to give testimony. Then allows the victim to tell the world what was happening here. Um, so so this is something that we'll see in these works here, but specifically in a couple of them. Really, though, a lot of Holocaust literature is this, is the result of bearing witness to the terror that they've lived through. Um, the break, I'll put that in quotations, break or scar of World War II and the Holocaust. Well, no, put it a different way. The break or scar of World War II and the Holocaust represent in world history. So this is in modern world history. This is unprecedented 5-6 years represented by World War II and the Holocaust. It is something utterly out of step with world history. If we look at the bulk of of human history, there have been, you know, horrors committed, throughout. I mean, um, just study the Spartans a little bit, but this is this really represents something unique. The Holocaust. This is death and murder on a scale not witnessed before. So what kind of break with world history does World War II and the Holocaust represent? Right? What um, what is unique about this moment? Some people would, you could easily, if you're a historian, if or you're studying history, you could also add in uh, the Stalinist terror to this moment. Timothy, I can't remember his last name. No, he's a professor of history at Harvard or Yale. Snyder, Timothy Snyder, is a historian, and he has a book called Bloodlands. And some people don't like what he has to say because they don't think you can compare the Holocaust to the Stalinist terror. But I think if you're looking at the historical moment, I don't think there's anything. I don't see anything out of step with this analysis. But he looks at both the both these moments of mass murder committed by the Nazis and then committed by Stalin, and he maps it over the region. And basically, you get a map of Poland, like where the two, these two, the bulk of the murder and the bulk of the death that happens in these few years is Poland, basically. Um, I think it's an interesting book, and I think it has something important to say. But anyway, so again, the myth of the passive Jewish victim. Um, this is you remember this from a previous lecture. There's good examples in this work about Jews who absolutely resisted their death in various ways. Um, and I had forgotten to bring this up in a previous lecture, but there's a really good movie called The Gray Zone, with Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi and other actors, that takes place in Auschwitz. And um, it's the core of the story is about this um, sabotage of two or three of the incinerators at Auschwitz. Um, Prisoners were expected to do all the burning of bodies and whatnot, and there was a cell of Jewish workers, well, and probably other non-Jewish workers as well, within Auschwitz at the time, who smuggled in just tons of gunpowder, and created these huge explosives, and they blew up two or three of the incinerators in the camp, killed themselves along the way, and it it probably did very little, but it was something, right? The idea of doing something was, they had just taken so much and they had seen so much that there was just not, they had to do something, even if it meant their own death, and even if it didn't really slow down the machinery of genocide that much. At least it was something, right? And this goes back to this undermining this myth that all Jewish victims of the Holocaust were just these willing, passive, um, sheep, basically. And finally, reading silence. So, if you ever take another literature course, you may have a professor who will, you know, ask you to, think about not just what is said in a work, but what is left unsaid. And quite often, what is left unsaid is as important, if not more important, than what is actually said in the text. And so that then gets to reading silence. How do you read that which is left unsaid? This becomes very important in literary analysis. So now to just get to a few important points in the book, starting with the introduction. If we go to XIV, actually we'll do it this way so I don't have to take up space of the introduction. So that's 14, page 14. Down at the bottom of the page, the paragraph. So Medallions is one of the first and most important literary accounts to take up the challenge to represent the Nazi machinery of genocide. Comparable to it in significance stands the work of Nalkowska's compatriot Tadeusz Borowski, whose compelling collection of short stories, This Way for the Guest, ladies and gentlemen, derived from his personal experience as a prisoner in Auschwitz and Dachau. So, so this is it's so short, right? It's so thin. It's such a thin little work, and yet its weight in telling this story is huge. It does so much um, to preserve the memory of these victims and this terrible moment. Um, um, it's comparable to Borowski's work. If you read, this was not translated, unfortunately, into English for quite a long while. Um, Not until 2000 was it translated, so it took quite a long while for it to find its way into English readers' hands. But it's always held in world literature. It's always held an important place in the study of the Holocaust and Holocaust literature. If you ever take a course on the Holocaust, or if you take a literature course that discusses the Holocaust, this book may very well pop up. Um, so the next page, at the top of the next page, XV, so 15. Um, Avoiding the tendency to mythologize. You remember previous lecture I talked about martyrology. Borowski wanted to avoid a martyrology, right? Avoiding the tendency to mythologize the victims as either heroes or martyrs, Medallions offers instead a concise, severely elegant witness to what people experienced in Poland during the war. And that is one of the things that um, really lend this a lot of gravitas. So it tells the stories plainly, and in that avoidance of emotion, um, it actually makes the experience, the event, even more horrific. When you're reading a story and it's talking about these terrible things that a person had to experience, um, and it's said in this very plain, matter of fact fashion, that actually creates more terror in the reader than a than a an emotional, uh, uh, blurting out would. And then one more important little phrase at the bottom, near the middle of that page, is this is kind of the epigram to the book. People dealt this fate to people. So that's something that Nalkowska wants us to remember, is that this is not these were not monsters who, you know, fantastical monsters who, from hell or something, or some, that that committed these crimes. These were ordinary people, human beings who did this to other people. So that's something that she wants us to really remember. I have here marked XVII. Um, Far away. XVII. Oh, yes, yes. So this is an important thing to keep in mind whenever you're talking about um, the um, the actions of Poles during the Holocaust. So this top paragraph, this first full paragraph on that page. So during World War II, during the occupation of Poland by the Nazis, there was a law that was specific to Poland. It didn't appear in any other Nazi occupied country, France or Denmark or Austria or Hungary or anywhere else. This law was only in place in Poland. And basically, the law was, if you were a non Jew and you were found to be harboring Jews or helping them in any way, you would be executed. You were punished, and the punishment was death. Um, and it would, this is like I said, this didn't appear anywhere else in occupied Europe. It was only in Poland. They had this specific law for Poles. Poles who helped Jews would be shot or killed in other ways. Um, and not only would you be punished, but quite possibly your whole family could be punished with death. And not only your whole family, but everyone in your apartment block or everyone in, on the same street that you lived could face the death penalty for if you helped Jews. And this was a real thing. This happened. Poles who were found to be helping Jews were shot with no trial. Um, and this is important to keep in mind when reading, especially like where she says, this paragraph mentions by the railway tracks. So reading it without knowing about this background, one might come across this story and, you read that no one in the village, people were scared to help the woman and they didn't, they avoided helping her. And then in the end, the only help they could give her was putting her out of her misery. That, without context, this is very callous and cruel. But you have to understand, Poles at the time in Poland under Nazi occupation were faced with a very difficult choice. Um, do you help this person and risk having yourself killed and possibly everyone around you killed, or do you, what do you do? Right? What becomes moral in that moment? Is it moral to help a person, even if it means that 100 people could face, if it's just you, maybe that's an easy moral choice. if helping a Jewish person during the occupation and you were caught only meant that you would face the death penalty, maybe that's an easy moral choice. Yes, you do it, right? And if if you end up being killed, well, that's that's at least you did something. But when the weight of 100 other innocent people is put on your shoulders, that that colors that moral decision much differently. And it could be 100 random people that you don't even know who end up dying because of what you did. So it becomes a very difficult choice for Polish people. Now, with that in mind, it's also important to know this fact about Poles. In Israel, there is, I guess, not an organization, but an honorary society called the Righteous Among Nations, and I believe they plant a tree for each member of this society. So what the Righteous Among Nations is, after the war and after all the all the evidence came out about what happened and people started an accounting of what had taken place, um, non-Jews who were found to have helped Jews escape the Nazis were given were awarded basically by Israel basically, but I guess at least some society that this title as one of the righteous among nations, meaning you weathered the danger of helping a Jew escape death, right? Um, so there are no Jewish members of this, right? This is all dedicated to other people who helped Jews escape death, and there are more Poles among the righteous among nations than any other than any other nationality. Probably more Poles than all the rest put together. And so I'd like you to keep that in mind. The fact that only in Poland could you be put to death for helping Jews, um, and yet more Poles are among this society than any other nationality. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I'm not going to tell you that there weren't also villains, Polish villains of this time. This is something that Poles, a lot of Poles don't like to talk about, especially the current conservative government definitely doesn't like being discussed. Is the fact that there were definitely a large minority of Poles who um, took part in, who helped with the death of Jewish people during the Holocaust. There was definitely a strand of anti-Semitism in Poland. There still is today. Um, there were um, there were a couple paramilitary groups who in Poland at the time, their main focus was resisting Nazi occupation, but they also some of these groups were very willingly killed Jews who they came across, which is just a terrible thing to have to deal with. But Poland is going to have to deal with this fact. There's a very famous town called Jedwabne. There was a book by a historian called Neighbors. So Jedwabne is a small village in eastern Poland, and very recently, in like the early 2000s, it was finally realized that the Poles of the village played a huge part in killing off the other half of the village, basically, who were Jews. They rounded them up, they put them in a barn, and then burnt the barn down. And Poland finally some of Poland finally came to terms with this. There's a memorial there now, but this is still something that a lot of more conservative Poles refuse to admit that Poles had any part in the genocide of Jews. And unfortunately, that's not true. There were some who did play a part. Most part, no. The huge majority of Poles did not take part in this, but there were instances. Um, so you have to admit that, and also understand understand the weight of the fact that Poles are populate this righteous among nations overwhelmingly more than any other nationality. So these are two things that you have to realize about the time. Um, so let's just mention some of the stories. So the first story we have is Professor Spanner, and I think yeah, I think one of the kind of core lines of the story is near the very end. Um, page 9. At the very bottom of page 9, um, the guy that she's interviewing says, in Germany, you can say people know how to make something from nothing. Now that's that we've heard that, you're making something from nothing, right? That's a kind of a common phrase. But in this context, what does that mean, that they were making something from nothing? So, if you think about like physics, right? It's impossible to make something from nothing, right? That sentence is actually an utter impossibility. You cannot make something from nothing. There's energy and matter, et cetera, et cetera. But in this context, what is that nothing? That word nothing, what does it represent? And what it represents is human lives. So the Germans weren't making something from nothing. They were making household items from the bodies of dead humans, of murdered humans. And so this is a chilling. This becomes a very something that sounds just kind of cliche and you wouldn't think about. In this context, becomes this horrific statement, right? This terrible thing, this terrible equation is made. Um, so that's something to keep in mind here. In the whole, another story, the whole. So something you should keep in mind here from the themes. Oh, as far as themes go, so I would say the theme here is all about the economy um, of death, right? That theme that I mentioned earlier. The whole is all about reading silences. The woman she's interviewing, there are several spots where she just stops talking. Right? She's in the middle of a sentence and then she just doesn't continue. So why is that? What is it that she's not saying, right? And why is she not saying it? This becomes very important. Cemetery lady, the cemetery lady. So here I see the theme that's working most here. These themes intermix with all the stories, but I'm just talking about like the most important theme. I think for each story, and you can find you could easily find other things at play here, but this one of the central themes to each of these stories. Then, so for Cemetery Lady, I would say the break with history that the Holocaust represents. By the railway track. So there's a couple things here. I think that a couple important themes that are at play here. First is the subverting the myth of the passive Jew, and also um, oh, I guess that was it. So this woman, she uh, does this. She what perpetuate. Oh gosh, I have no vocabulary anymore. She does this thing, this act, I'm sure there's a word, that is almost superhuman, right? Escaping from this moving train, no matter what it might mean, she refuses to allow other people to determine her moment of death. So even though it's what she does is extremely dangerous, it's better in her mind than just allowing her death to happen. Right? So, the Voira Jalona. That's right. Again, bearing witness, I think, is important. This is an important theme here. I want to share with you. Give me a moment. Let me open it up. Um, um, so there's a passage here in this story that always really struck me, and so I used it to write a poem. So I wanted to share it with you. I'm sure you'll find it boring. If you want to skip ahead a couple minutes, go ahead. But anyway, so I called it "I Wanted to Live." So it's kind of a found poem. A found poem is something you just like it says, you just happen to find it. And it's not a word for word quotation, but it's a lot of the words that she used in the text, and I've reworked them a little bit. So if you'll just bear with me. When they shot me, I thought maybe I'm still alive. I'll tell you, I wanted to live. I don't know why, because I didn't have a husband or family, no one, and I wanted to live. I was missing an eye, I was hungry and cold, and I wanted to live. I thought, I'm the only one who's going to survive. I thought, there won't be a single Jew left on the face of this earth, and I wanted to live. Why? I'll tell you why. To tell everything, just like I'm telling you now, to let the world know what they did. I wanted to live. So I write poetry. So go back to our whiteboard. Okay, so the next story is the visa, and all the visa means here is it's like a raised spot with a view is all that means, like on a hill. Um, so I think an important thing to keep in mind is here is defiance. So there's a moment where people who are about to be victims sing a Jewish hymn in resistance to their captors. So that's an important moment. And then finally, the man is strong. Now, this is just a heart wrenching story. Again, the economy of death here, I think, comes into play. So there's a moment where the man, the main character, sees the bodies of his family, and he begs to be killed by the Nazis. But he's strong. He's young and strong, and he can work. So the Nazis refuse to kill him. They want to get as much work out of him as possible before he dies. So the economic decisions of this man's life that are being made by villains, basically, that's something that's a important theme to keep in mind. So that is all I really wanted to say about the book. I think as terrible as it is, it's I hate to say enjoyable, but it's a really great work of literature. So I hope you get something out of it. And that is all for now. Thank you.